Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you're dialing in from. My name is Yusuf Al-Yusuf. I am the chairman of Mela, and I will be your host for this evening. We have a very special guest with us tonight. Dr. Yasar Jarrar has joined us, and he will be talking about a very interesting topic. He'll be talking about a new breed of leaders in the after Corona life. And this fits in very well with, this topic fits in very well with the purpose of Mela and what we do at Mela, which is really to cultivate new leaders in the Middle Eastern region, in the Arab region, to make a better future. Dr. Yasar has an extremely impressive career. He is a strategy advisor with over 30 years of experience in the public sector in leadership and modernization, technology for development and education. He advised senior clients in the region, including the UAE Prime Minister's Office, Abu Dhabi and Dubai's executive councils, Oman Royal Court, Saudi Arabian General Investment Authority, amongst many others. Some of his titles include the Board of Trustees member at the Dubai Future Academy in the UAE, Professor of the Hult International Business School in the UAE and USA, the Vice Chair of the Global Agenda Council of the Future of Government, World Economic Forum, Global Fellow, MasterCard Center for Inclusive Growth, USA, Advisor at Bain Co., Visiting Fellow at the Cranfield School of Management in the UK, Senior Advisor, the Harvard International Negotiations Program, Harvard University, USA, and he's a Fellow at Mohammed bin Rashid School of Government, UAE. Dr. Yasar is also the author of The Sheikh CEO, which is, you can check out the book on www.thesheikhceo.com. Believe it or not, this was a very condensed version of the doctor's profile. Without waiting any further, I would like to welcome back Dr. Yasar. Thank you very much for being here with us, Doctor.
Thank you, Yusuf, and good evening, everyone. Assuming you're all around the Middle East region, but good day to you wherever you are. It's a pleasure to be here with you. For most of you, I checked very quickly some of the names on the list. I haven't had the pleasure of meeting most of you, but some are familiar names, all the friends. So great to see you all. This is an end of day chat. I think when Yusuf invited me and my good friend Selma to join this chat, we said, let's make it a fireside chat. We don't have snow, we don't have fire around, but it's going to be a chance for me to share with you some thoughts, some of the studies we have done, reflect on the world we're living in today, and to try to project forward, to think what happens to our world in the next few years, what kind of leaders do we need, and believe it or not just you as Mela or me, myself as a researcher or other people, a lot of people are interested in this question about what kind of leaders do we need. We all know we need different leaders, different breed of leaders. And who better to spread the message and sort of build that practice apart from you. So I think what I will do is I will spend the next 30, 35, maybe 40 minutes talking, sharing some comments and thoughts. So some of this might sound super fast for those of you who haven't heard some of these facts and figures and notes before. Others who've heard this might sound very slow. So I will try to finish this at the right pace so we can have a conversation afterwards. And I would love to learn more from you. It's an absolute pleasure, by the way, to be back with the Mela crowd. I was telling Yusuf now that I gave a talk with the Mela team in 2016. So it's been a few years. Those days life was better. We could see each other physically. I was able to stand and shake hands. Today we're just gonna have to be able to just, wave. Soon we'll be able to knock elbows again. So life is getting slightly it's a balance back. So what do we mean by the AC world, the after Corona world? So my first comment on this is I'm going to talk a lot about the Middle East and the region because I think that's where a lot of us operate. This is called the Mela, so hence Middle East is the focal point. But getting out of the Middle East, the whole world now, if you look at what everybody's talking about by way of the importance of the COVID-19 issue, the world is going to be marked by before Corona and after Corona. So we have a BC and the AC now date. Maybe the generation before us had the Nakba or the World War II. Every generation has one of these, right? So it's a one in a lifetime thing. It's not a thing. It's not a كل مر سيمر in Arabic. No, it's a big thing. It's a lifetime. It's a generational crisis. Hopefully the last one we'll see in our generation, but not necessarily the last one. So we're talking about the AC world, and we're trying to project what happens as we start moving forward in a region that actually has been fighting many wars before the AC world. We have been a region that, and some of you might know, I've been giving talks about the fiscal challenges in the region. I've been giving talks for the last 10 years about the challenges of the Arab Spring and the resurgence of that. So this region wasn't stable by any standard. And then we get hit by one of the biggest fronts in the whole world, which is Corona, which is a generational change. And we get hit by a huge front, which didn't get enough coverage, which is the absolute collapse of the oil price. I was with some friends on a Zoom party one evening when the oil price reached the futures, May contracts, reached minus 56 for Texas WTI. So you had to pay money for people to take your oil. It's back now, and I'm going to say some words around that. But basically, we've been spending some time now in the last 4 months working with governments who are deciding effectively how do we solve this thing. And there was a very grim reality, right? Governments had to think, do we throw money at this problem or do we throw bodies at this problem? You had to decide. You open the economy and throw bodies because it will kill people, or you close the economy and you throw money because it's going to burn your economy. And if you're a leader in government at this point in time, you're having the toughest challenge in your life, because these are not questions an average sort of person should be able to deal with, and you will be blamed either way. If people die, now if you close up and save lives, people say people are dying from starvation. It's a horrible time in the whole world to address very tough questions. And then we ask ourselves, what kind of leader is needed to maneuver in this world? So what kind of compass do you need inside you? What kind of decision-making tools? How do you even do a cost-benefit analysis to how many people should die versus how many people should starve from lack of jobs? So that's the kind of world we're in. And in the region, it's double compounded by this whole collapse of the oil price. So whereas maybe in places like the GCC, or people who rely on aid from the GCC, like maybe Jordan, Egypt, we could have maybe withstood some of the bumps if oil was 80. But when oil hit 20 and 10, we had an issue. This is not going to go away. Even if you live in Dubai, where things have, as of today, the pools are open, which was the last bastion of our resistance. Emirates Airlines will be back in the skies on the 1st July. This is not going to go away. We see second waves. We see the numbers going crazy in India. They're turning trains now in India, train carts into makeshift hospitals. And this is going to be how severe is your lockdown versus how much you want to control the economy, because the longer you extend this curve and suppress it down, the more you choke your economy. And we're looking at 2021, definitely Q2, before we even start seeing any normality. These are scenarios that have been done by the Harvard Center for International Development for the GCC. And it shows very different things. I'm not going to get into now. This is not an epidemiologist session, but this is not going to go away anytime soon. And that means the issue with our economy as leaders is not going to go anywhere soon. So because the top half is your typical virus curve, and there has been an exponential rise in people looking at exponential curves in the last 3 months. We all learned what an exponential curve means. We all learned what curves mean. But if you look at the bottom part, which is the more interesting one for our session, this is the part where, let me see if I can use tech to. This is the part where the recession is. So the more you save lives here, the more you compress this, the more you're damaging the economy and the more you're prolonging your recession. So here's the worst part of this. My fellow at Harvard, Ricardo Hausman, who was presenting this to us at one point, called it the best part. He meant best academically, intellectually. It's by no means the best part. This is not a normal recession. This is not a demand shock, right? This is not about, it's mainly a supply shock, because the whole supply chains around the world are being destroyed. This is also not something we can solve with traditional Keynesian policies, because it will have limited effectiveness. The layoffs that you're seeing today, the numbers of people being laid off, the bankruptcies in small to medium enterprises, the number of bankruptcies that is expected in the GCC come August is exponential because we're running out of cash simply. So that is not something that can recover very quickly, right? So, if you're living in the UAE like I am, you see headlines today of gyms closing down and so on. And these are not things that can come back the minute we say, oh, virus is done, let's go back to work. You cannot switch back on small enterprises. You cannot switch back on rehiring people. Fiscal policies will not help in here. So banks can throw money at this. The central bank can throw 70 billion. But if there's a sentiment issue, if there's a supply chain issue, if there's a demand issue, this is not going to help. So we don't have the traditional tools to deal with this economic crisis. So what does that mean for us as leaders? Well, as leaders in an area like the Middle East, this could be what I always like to say. This all started in China, but the Chinese people, when they write the word crisis, it has two parts in the Chinese language. And one symbol denotes a crisis, a danger, and the other is opportunity. So there's opportunity in every single, and you could look at this and you could say there's hardly any opportunity because this is about lives and health, and this is about an economy. This comes at a time in a region that has 30% unemployment in the youth before COVID. So pre-COVID, we used to hear people are looking for jobs in the GCC, in Jordan, in Algeria. Pre-COVID, we had the signs of the Arab Spring resurgence in Sudan, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon. People were on the streets, even signs in Egypt. So this pre-COVID, this region was struggling to cope with its socio-economic model, its growth issues. And then this happened. So these problems we're seeing now are compounding a very, very severe situation. So why do we see opportunities? How naive are we? Well, here's how this works. We are now in what we call Tera Incognita. So in the old days, people who used to chart maps, they would go back to their king and they would say, we've reached the end of the known map. And then they would another expedition goes out. The expedition that goes out after them reaches the end of the known map. And the old saying of the here be dragons. Here be dragons means we've reached the end of the known map. We have no visibility what's coming up front. It could be dragons. It could be waves. It could be that we have no clue. And hence, we have no trends or a basis to compare on. There's nothing to build on. There's no Keynesian policies. There's no printing money. There's not much we can rely on from our history and our knowledge base moving forward. So like the old explorers who were going into Tera Incognita, you today as leaders of the private sector and the government are standing at the edge of Tera Incognita. And look, Tera Incognita could have dragons at the end of the day, but it also could be full of opportunity, hope. It depends how you approach it, how fast you react, how agile you are, what kind of data you have, how fast you learn. So Tera Incognita could be a very, very scary situation to be in or a very exciting one. Tera Incognita not in the Middle East now, but across the whole world. And I'll show you some things that people are discussing by way of thinking forward. So this was the black swan. It shouldn't have been a black swan. It should have been a white swan if you believe people like Gates and others who were always saying the pandemic is coming. In fact, Bill Gates has been saying this a pandemic is coming to the point where there's a whole conspiracy theory now thinking he's behind the pandemic. People get silly sometimes, and when bad things happen, they like to blame it on somebody. The old Greeks used to blame it on Zeus and the gods, the angry gods. Now we're blaming it on Gates. When it first broke out, by the way, in China, people said it's the Chinese people, God is punishing them. Then it broke out in Iran. The Arabs said it's punishing Iran because they're bad. So everybody started using those and it's not Bill Gates. It's a bad disease. But it's a black swan. So here's what happened with black swans in history. In the 14th century, the Black Death was the end of the feudal system, of the whole system al-iqta'i in Arabic, in Europe. And it started with a new employment contract. The Renaissance came out of that. After that, the 100-year war between England and France kick-started a major innovation drive. The 2008 crisis, believe it or not, created a lot of opportunities. World War I, World War II created the world we live in today. Basically, everything we know about governing the world we live in, the IMF, the World Bank, everything was created post-World War II. So the gaps that are being exposed today by COVID will create a new world order. How does this new world order look? I will give you my thoughts. You're free to read. Francis Fukuyama, the guy who wrote The End of History, just put out something in the Foreign Affairs about the new world order. Henry Kissinger put something about the coming world order, and they all revolve around the same thing. But let's go back to our business and our life. In the recent crises, we've seen innovations. When SARS, very similar, it's a coronavirus as well, SARS pandemic hit in 2008 and 2004, people were stuck at home, they needed to shop, they needed to buy stuff. Alibaba came to the rescue. And Alibaba, not our Arabian little thief, it was the company who started helping see people in Singapore and China, and suddenly, and it grew out of need because people needed more deliveries, Amazon wasn't that big. In 2008, companies needed more affordable transport, more affordable accommodation, and things like Airbnb and Uber came up. And ironically now, the sharing economy, which is Airbnb and Uber and others, is being slaughtered by COVID. Because the one thing you don't want to do now is share stuff with other people. So we know for a fact there will be a bunch of companies that will come up now to solve some of the problems we're facing today. That will be the next big thing in the next 10 years. And if you want to prosper, be opportunistic, solve for this crisis, your company could be one of them. And it's equal chances for everybody. We don't know what they are. I can give you some hints today in the areas we're looking for them. We do some investments, we do some research. So I'll give you areas where people are looking for these new startups. So that's where we think there's opportunity. We also think there's opportunity for nations. You live in different countries, you live in different jurisdictions. So there will be a complete rebranding of countries now based on what we see in front of us. Countries, the way countries have dealt with this, the way they offered security to their people or not, supported their SMEs or not, supported their local population and the residents or not. So the way everybody's watching, the healthcare system, how fast did it collapse? How nice was the police dealing with all of this? What was the capacity? Were the schools ready or not? You know what this is going to do? This is going to create a new set of country brands. And your country could be one of the winners. Now everybody thinks, there's a serious conversation, by the way, going on now of people saying, can Jacinda Ardern please come and run Europe? Because she's dealt with everything that ever happened badly over the last few years in New Zealand perfectly. As a leader, she shines. So there's a country like New Zealand now where the next $1 billion investment or the next immigrant or the next brain would think, I would actually prefer to be in a New Zealand than an America. I would prefer to be in a Singapore than a Kuwait. And for obvious reasons, because we see them now, what's happening now live is redrafting. Even the biggest countries around the world, people were saying this COVID-19 could be China's Chernobyl moment. If you know history and you know Chernobyl, you know what Chernobyl did to the might of the Russian Empire. Or it could be America's Suez moment. Again, history tells us the Suez Canal invasion was effectively the announcement of the end of the British Empire. They lost their might, they couldn't deliver it. Is this America's Suez moment? Are we witnessing the beginning of the end of this American hegemony and their abilities? We don't know. All we know is in the next 5 years, whatever happens now will rebrand these countries. And that means people, money, businesses will go to different countries than they went to. I don't think any of you is going to plan a long-term investment in Italy, north of Italy anytime soon. But you might be considering New Zealand as a more resilient place for retirement, depending on who you are and what you're thinking about. So we learned a lot of lessons. Countries learned a lot of lessons. Businesses have to listen to these lessons because here's what the first opportunity coming your way. More and more countries will make where they sell. Sufficiency, whether it's regions, if you have a functioning region like the EU, or countries are desperately thinking about now, why are these supply chains? People were being held hostage with masks, simple masks. You were sending your ambassador to negotiate a couple of factories to send you masks, food, medicine. Today we hear AstraZeneca signed a deal, 400 million vaccines to be produced in 3 European countries. What about the rest of the world? So this is about, are you able to make stuff in your country? And if you don't make stuff in your country, you're reliant on others. So there's a big lesson about make where you out of countries in the next 5 years in our region. convincing people to make it here. We actually, unfortunately, consulting companies over the past 10 years convinced some of these countries to go away from industry. It's too expensive. You don't have the labor force. You don't have the feedstock. You know, focus on services, focus on tourism. The growth is in financial sectors. And now we realize that if you don't make stuff, then you're reliant on somebody else. And when bad things happen, your future is not in your control. So there's going to be a lot of making happening. A lot of the resurgence of industrial strategy is on the doors. Diversification by way of connectivity. We know that countries that succeeded were more connected. Learn anywhere, anytime. The future of education is being redrafted ahead of us. It will be very hard for all of you to justify a business class flight next time there's a Mela meeting. Now that we can do this, very hard. Your accountant will look you in the face, in the eye, your shareholders, government expenses, flying business class for education, for meetings, working. So learn anywhere, anytime, and work anywhere, anytime will become the new normal. So what does that do for our life as business people, as government officials, and as leaders? Well, the first thing is the future is canceled now. So the future we used to preach in the past. By December 12th, we used to say urban density is the future, right? 52% of people now live in cities. 75% of people around the world will live in cities by 2050. Well, guess what? If you've seen what happened with New York, you're not going to invest in an apartment because we know now urban spread is better. Urban density is not a good idea. This will push a lot of governments to start building wider infrastructures for urban sprawl. The Melbourne model is where people want to go now, not the New York model. This will change how we look at urban density, how we look at buildings, how we look at construction, and how we look at spread. The sharing economy is all but dead for now. It might come back in one shape or the other, but sharing anything, including air, including sharing space, which happens on a plane or in a concert, is finished. So your Ubers, your sharing economy by way of buying other people's stuff, that's gonna die down. Government priorities will die down. In the region, if you live in the GCC, Jordan, Egypt, Algeria, in the Middle East, even Iran, how governments spend their money is going to fundamentally change. So I can tell you most of the 2030, 2050, 20 anything plans have to be restructured drastically now. A lot will say we've already got this, we've got it sorted, but you know we've been caught short with medical supplies. You know we've been caught short with our industrial strategy. So a lot of priorities will change. This is around the world. I'm focusing on the Middle East, but this applies to the whole world. So what will happen? What are the opportunities ahead of government? And I'm rushing through this as well to leave a lot of time for a chat. So governments now have a few chances to think about if you're in a new government. First of all, you have a chance to rethink your country branding. How you deal with this, how you position your country will have a huge impact on how people conceive of your country as safe, as a good place to do business. Did you as a government help small business enterprises to stay alive? Did you extend a hand to say, we will look after you in this crisis? Some countries have said, no one will fail. Other countries said, basically, may the best man win, or the best person win. The jungle. If you can't survive, tough. This will give people a lot of thoughts moving forward on where they go and where they put their money. Supply chains around the world will be restructured. We know Apple pulled out some of their manufacturing capacity already out of China and set up in Vietnam. Now, Vietnam has been the darling of ASEAN because Vietnam has so many qualities that are attractive. And we probably could talk about the Vietnam miracle and so on. But that doesn't mean companies that are leaving China will all go to Vietnam, because a lot of this reconstruction of the supply chain has to go closer to the markets. So we have one or two countries in the region who could be prime candidates to absorb that excess manufacturing capacity coming out of China and restructuring the supply chains. One of them is Egypt. They've got the local market base, they've got the manpower, they don't have the policies though. So there's an opportunity for Egypt to stand up and be counted and say, we will be the next X, but there's a long road ahead. And that's hence my slide about the long road ahead. We had the chance to fix all of these things, but now we have not just only the intellectual need, we also have the market opportunity. This is the time where governments can invest in research and development. A lot of governments in this part of the world have invested a lot in the entertainment part, In the tourism part, we have fantastic infrastructure. We have probably more football stadiums and more concert halls than we need. We don't have think tanks or science laboratories. This is probably the time to sit back and say, the old model of saying, let them build it, we will buy it, is not going to work anymore. We need to create content, intellectual content, research, science. So we're probably going to see some of that. Not everybody will take these opportunities. I can guarantee you some leaders, some businesses, some governments will learn zero out of this. It's a matter of this will pass. There's something about innovation. Some countries, as we speak, are innovating new policies, new way of thinking, new products. Some governments, some companies started redrafting how they work, how they operate, how they operate in terms of remote work. Others are basically caught like a rabbit in the headlights. So at the country level, we're going to see more investment we could see more investment in infrastructure for innovation, government resilience and trust. Governments are desperately trying to brand themselves as successful now, even unsuccessful ones. And what to bet on moving forward? You can bet on restructuring the whole education platform, which means some investments we made will be lost. Other investments might be needed, a lot of tech needed here. And we just discovered how little our healthcare investment has been so far. And how, and in the GCC at least, how unsustainable it was. Unsustainable in terms of the manpower behind it, the capabilities, and how our focus has been limited on some of the treatment aspects. In business, so that was the government sort of national thinking. In business, there's two buzzwords I'm going to leave you with today if you haven't heard of them. The first buzzword is this new economy we call the low-touch economy. So in the next 2 years, we all need low-touch things, right? Products, services. And I give you a few examples here just for entertainment's sake, not haha entertainment, but as exploratory examples. We're going to have to redesign factory floors. If you're an industrial engineer and you love production lines, factory floors need to keep safe distances. We never thought of that. Zoom babysitters, have you heard of that? Services, these are services. Dining, we're going to have to start dining with social distances and potentially the perspex screens we see today. Visiting elderly people through perspex screens. Robots doing a lot of the cleaning. I know 2 companies, at least where I live, have replaced their typical cleaners companies with robots who go and spray around because the cleaning companies were infected. So this is what we call the low-touch economy. So if you want to make money in the next 2 years, look for products and services that can solve for low touch. And the predictions are some of these things will not come back. So when we get used to a certain level of low touch, we're not going to go back into high touch in some of the areas. If we perfect this idea of robots desanitizing a certain cleaning area, robots are cheaper and more reliable. They don't complain, they don't get sick, and they don't ask for a raise. So we will not going to go back to hiring physical people to do that. Once we redesign the factory floors, by definition, we have to have more effective technology to replace for that. We're not going to go back. If you work in government or the private sector now, and you manage to do all your work, and I know companies who did, working remotely, there's very little sense of you saying, let me go back now after 4 months and continue paying unbelievable amounts of rent. I know government departments who are saying, why are we paying this rent then? If all my staff could do their work from home, maybe I shrink it to 1/3 of the office. I'll keep the office for social interaction. And I don't need to bring people, all of them, to work at the same time. The Department of Transport in Canada announced last week that remote work from now on is the default. So if you're an employee in the Department of Transport and the Canadian government or a supplier, you're working remotely. If you want to come to an office to meet, you have to tell them why. So for businesses, there's a lot of opportunities in this low-touch economy. And I think some of them will not come back, as I said. There's another buzzword, another economy you need to keep your eye on, which is the sterile economy. Now, you might have been surprised, like me, how dirty our world was. When I saw COVID coming and then somebody stands up in a hotel room and says, we will clean the hotel rooms from now on when people leave the room. And you think, and you haven't been doing that? So I'm never going to a hotel again, by the way, after I heard what kind of cleaning they need to do now that there's this virus out there. Aeroplanes were pushing videos out there. Oh, now we clean the food trays when you leave the airplane, and you haven't been doing that. So I've been eating off a food tray with about 7,000 people who snotted on it before me. So we realize now how some of the sterile economy aspects are never going to leave us. Because what happens is there's a stickiness factor to some of these practices. When you start telling people, I'm going to give you stickiness by way of people get used to it. When you start telling your employees, I'm going to give you half a day off on Thursday, it will be welcomed, but it won't be a big deal. But try taking it away. Try taking away somebody's raise. Taking stuff away that are seen as good, there's a huge factor to that. So imagine now hotels after 1 year start telling you, we're done now, we don't have to clear as much. So we're moving into an area where the sterile economy is going to be standard. I have friends who work in Majd Al Futtaim who tell me everything they've put in their malls is going to be standard from now on. How they clean, how they operate. So this is not, they're not buying makeshift equipment. Emirates Airlines tell me the same thing. So but the thing is, a lot of these things don't have products, don't have supply chains. Some things were flying over from out there. My friends at the malls were saying to just buy these thermal testing machines. They had to wait in line for one producer in Thailand or somewhere in ASEAN who had a huge waiting line. So a lot of the products behind the low-touch economy or the sterile economy either have not been invented yet or don't exist in this region. So there's a lot of business opportunities, even just by addressing current needs, let alone innovating for the life moving forward. And here's a bit of a reminder. If you don't respond to change, if you are not agile to understand that the world has changed around you 100%, if you think this will not affect us or this is going to pass, you will join this Hall of Fame. I don't need to explain to leaders like you what this Hall of Fame is. They all went bust and they were all leaders in there because they all sat down. The world around them changed, but they sat down thinking, now let's produce another roll of film, or let's produce another digital camera. Don't worry about Instagram. People still want to produce cameras, produce pictures, and put them in albums. So some of them can come back, but this is a good reminder of what happens if you ignore the phenomenal change that is happening around us today. And I tell you what the biggest crisis in the world today, it's leadership. A lot of the challenges we're facing, especially in the region, climate change around the world, youth unemployment, it's all policies. It's all policies. None of this is God-made. None of this is a hurricane that we cannot control. It's policies we wrote as leaders. It's policies that we decided how much to emit. We decided how to do the rentier state and not let people in or out of a certain economy. We decided how cumbersome it is to start a business. It's astounding to me how leadership and stuff we write can affect people. So what do we need moving forward? We need some superheroes, to be honest. We need leaders that are different. And I say superheroes because a lot of courage is needed in these kind of times. First of all, here's an example of what not to do. So these are the kind of people who are not doing the right things, right? Either by saying the wrong things or acting on the wrong things, acting on ideologies, using brute force, if you know this guy. I mean, I don't want to even go there. But Boris Johnson, at least, somebody who you would think was more, but they all demonstrate failures of leadership, adhering to old models, trying to use hard power. And here's a bunch of leaders who actually succeeded. Now, there's a prize at the end of the presentation to spot one major difference between national leaders who are succeeding and doing amazingly well for their countries. 5 of the happiest countries around the world, Denmark, Norway, Finland, and Iceland, in terms of the happiness and well-being index, longevity. New Zealand, the star of everything, the biggest industrial power who dealt with COVID very well. Taiwan, they're all led by a certain type of leaders. And we have the other type of leaders who we sort of want to see less of moving forward. So I'm going to give you some characteristics of the future leaders that we're looking for, but there's a hint on this slide. Let me see if anybody gets the hint. I see Yusuf smiling, so I'm assuming Yusuf guessed it already. But joking aside, there's certain traits that we're looking for moving forward in the future. The people on the right, focus on well-being. Jacinda Ardern has a well-being strategy. They are focusing much more on industrial. They're more inclusive. When Syrian refugees were being kicked out by every single nation around the world, Merkel took 1 million of them, despite lack of popularity in her party. We see certain leadership. Where did these come from? First of all, a lot of them have a very tough moral compass, not moral by way of morality as we want to explain. It's their true north, their self-awareness, values-based leadership. You've heard about this stuff. You know the whole live your true north. But they genuinely live things they believe in. They don't flip-flop. They don't follow pure political positions. They don't follow the hard-nosed politics. And you've seen some of the leadership that is based on principles, as I mentioned, a couple of them, like Jacinda, like Germany, like all of the Nordic countries. And you've seen the very hard-nosed, bipartisan kind of leadership. Some of it, by the way, in his case, very well intentioned. He wanted to solve serious problems, but using the different types of power, hard power. But the future leaders we're looking for, we need people who are, let me start from the bottom left. We need community builders. I think the age of the strong man, it used to be a strong man, strong woman, party-led, talking to a small base is probably finished in politics and government. The internet, fourth industrial revolution, social media has widened the base too much, and people will never see eye to eye in any country. We need leaders who can actually bring people together despite their differences, not people who say, I lead the Republicans, the hell with everybody else, they're bad. Or I like this newspaper, the others are lying. Or I will do this to these people because I hate the others. We need community builders. And this means immediately we need a lot of empathy in our future leaders. None of this is clever. This is empathy. These are community builders. So we're talking about very deep understanding of my good friend Daniel Shapiro in Harvard wrote a book, and I advise you all to read it. I advise everybody to read it. It's called Beyond Reason. He's the Harvard program are the people who wrote the book Getting to Yes, but then he wrote Beyond Reason. How do you negotiate with people who are willing to die for their belief? This is not about the business negotiation of one text, yes or no. It's beyond reason. Empathy, but at the same time, so I'm talking about these very right brain, soft, not soft because they're not good, they're not amazing, but soft in terms of untouchable traits. But then we need hard-nosed, data-driven leaders at the same time. We are now in the age of data. We have more data than the humanity had ever had since creation of writing. We need people who can make decisions fast that are based on data and evidence. We need people who listen to experts but know how to take action, and unbelievably agile. Our world today requires very agile leadership in the sense that we're literally now in Tera Incognita. And in Tera Incognita, you don't want a leader who has a 10-year plan. You want a leader who's a survivor, who can change direction, rally the troops, build community, while changing direction 180 at the same time. This is the new breed of leader. And I can tell you, I'm the first one to put my hand up and say, this is not the kind of stuff we used to train leaders on. We used to always touch base on empathy, give it 1 day out of a 10-day course, touchy-feely, just to make sure we tick the box. But we never said, look, you're only going to be an amazing leader if you start here. Everything else can be learned. In fact, if you're not good at data, you can hire these kind of people. But if you don't have this, you're not the person who will lead us into the future. So I'm going to stop after this very fast round robin. I know we have 15 minutes left. If there's any questions, I can possibly answer them. If there are no questions, here's my Gmail. If you want to email me with anything, here's my Twitter. If you want to see the kind of funny things I find funny in a sarcastic way around the world. And hopefully this was a bit of a useful session for you with some fresh ideas that could help you chart your way and your leadership journey moving forward. Yusuf, I'm going to stop here and see if you want to take this with any questions or if you had any reactions yourself. You're muted. Yusuf, you're muted, and I can't do anything. I'm not the host.
All right, so we're all familiar with these Zooms. I was just trying to unmute myself. Doctor, thank you so much for your insights. It was really exciting, it was really inspiring. You know, to summarize everything, I think this, you know, should really instill hope in every single one of us, that there are opportunities. You know, there are challenges, but on the back of it, there are opportunities, and we just need to be we need to be agile. We need to be smart. We need to redefine the way we think, in order to, you know, to go through Terra Incognita, as you said. You have a lot of questions, Doctor. I don't know how you're going to manage it in 14 minutes, but I'm going to start quickly.
Well, no,
So,
Yusuf, just to tell everybody, before we started this, Yusuf said, in case we have no questions, I'll ask you one. So I think this is good news that you have a lot of questions, Yusuf. We had planned one question at least to keep the session alive.
So the first question is from Nabil Sajwani from the United Arab Emirates. So Dubai has been a great example in leadership and how to focus on motivating its citizens, coupled with leading by example. But Dubai has also been very keen in incorporating success stories in their own model as well. Example, certain business models from Singapore, Hong Kong, and London. Seeing that we're in uncharted territory, should we possibly take a more calculated approach and treat this as a collective global issue? Or does opening up commercially mean we need to be more individual domestic risks than others? So we need to take more individual domestic risks than others.
Oh, wow. Okay, so that's a very interesting question. Look, I'll start with the collective issue, the collective global issue. I don't think anybody disagrees with me when I say that collectively the world has failed on collective work. We have not seen any collective global action. We have not seen a statement by the G20 saying how they will do this together. We haven't seen the G7. We have not seen even the UN. In fact, if anything, countries are shooting at our collective action mechanisms, the WHO and others. So in terms of waiting for a collective action globally, Nabil, I don't think we stand a chance. We are in a world where I think, like Ian Bremmer like to call it, this is the G0 world, every nation for itself. We learn lessons from each other, we want to interact, and unfortunately this comes at a time where the GCC in itself is not a functioning mechanism either. So we can't even rely on a small unit. So how much risk do you take? Look, every nation will decide for its own, every city, every nation. This will depend on a couple of factors, so there's no right answer. So the first thing is, how well did you lose the lockdown? When you were in lockdown, did you build extra capacity? Did you build makeshift hospitals? Because COVID-19, by the way, this is not Ebola. Ebola kills 95% of the people it touches. This is under 1%. So the issue here is, can you isolate the very vulnerable people, elderly, above a certain 65 or 70 age, people with pre-existing conditions? Do you have enough capacity in your healthcare system to manage this if the surge comes? In Dubai, we know there's going to be a second wave, right? But we know that they've built makeshift hospitals that didn't exist in March. When this show started, in March, we had 3 hospitals we could rely on. Now we have makeshift hospitals. So if you have built that capacity, and if you have the agility to be able to shut down very fast and go through the W recovery, then you should open up. Because I can tell you what, the damage of lockdown. Yesterday, Imran Khan in Pakistan stood up and said, we're not going to lock down because locking down will kill more people. Majority of Pakistan work on a daily per diem. And if you stop them for a week, that's 1 week's food, money is gone. In the other parts of the world, like in the UAE and USA, the divorce rate and suicide rate has skyrocketed. So the damage we're causing to people delaying surgery. There are people around the world now who are delaying much needed surgery, visits to doctors. So these lockdowns, it's not about we open and we all get sick and we close and we all get healthy. Lockdowns are causing much more economic, social, mental health damage. So I think Dubai is doing it the right way. They're being a bit more bold than others, but there's no other way, I think, of doing it because Dubai has the capacity to deal with the next surge and the resilience to close down. And we will close down again, unfortunately. But I don't think there's one answer. And waiting collectively for the world, there's no one to wait for. Look, everybody's looking around to think who's got it right. You can criticize Sweden and then praise Sweden, and then we criticize Sweden, we praise New Zealand, and so on.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you very much. The next question, I know you've touched on this already through the low-touch economy and the sterile economy, but if you can just summarize, Ihab Tabara from Saudi is asking, your advice for a leader and an entrepreneur, what venture would you advise to get into, getting into this Terra Incognita or uncharted territory?
Well, if you're an entrepreneur and have a business running today, a startup, a small enterprise, of course, the biggest advice your investors talk to you already, defend the cash. Because in the next 6 months, we will all live or die by cash. It's not how good your idea is, or in the past, how connected you were, or who you know. Governments are running out of cash. In Saudi, the government is running out of cash. In Kuwait, there was some talk about not even being able to pay the salary for June in the public sector. So it's a cash crunch. And this cash crunch is going to be tough. So if you're running a business now, defend cash. Talk to I have investors who I know got on the call with some of the companies they invested in and say, stop paying rent. And if the landlord doesn't like it, leave. Stop paying rent, half the salaries, give people their annual leave. So cash. But if you are not in that position, or you're thinking about a question about what do I invest in, where do I start? Look, this is the age-old advice. I myself follow it now. I'm starting a couple of businesses with some of my friends, and it's solved for the issues we're dealing with today. So there's a lot of low-hanging fruits because the sterile and low-touch economy needs a whole bunch of new supply chains that don't exist in our region. So if you want to low-hanging fruit, jump on that. If you want a more deeper investment kind of game, go into think industry. Forget from now on, my friends, this platform, this whole gig economy, the cool stuff we all worked on and bluffed on. The future is going to be an industrial strategy. That's where government will put their money. That's where VCs will follow. And the breakdown of the global supply chains. That doesn't mean tech is not important. It's unbelievably important, but use tech to make stuff. Think stuff moving forward, not services.
Thank you, Doctor. Our next question is from Nahid from Egypt. So in a region that relies a lot on face-to-face interaction and proximity to build trust and business relationships, what expectations do you have for the MENA region's adoption of the low-touch economy?
Look, this is a very important question because I looked at our region, Nahid, and places like Jordan, where I look at places like Holland, who the Prime Minister went up and said, be careful, avoid each other, and they did. And I have a friend in Holland who works in Shell, and I called him and he said, look, this whole quarantine thing, they just took my life and called it quarantine. I don't meet that many people. I am basically wash my hands every day. I avoid crowds. Whereas in a place like Jordan, they had to use martial law, literally martial law. This is a law we use when we're being attacked by aliens. And we had to use that to tell people stay away from each other. And they still went to the weddings and kissed each other and spread the disease. So there's going to be a lot of adjustment. We have issues that have to do with religion. We have Friday prayers. We have a lot of challenges in the UAE. We had a huge spread in the local population during Ramadan nowadays because people still wanted to do Taraweeh together. So it will take a long time before this untangles. Because the low-touch economy, the hardest part of it is the social aspects. I don't think we're going to have problems with the business scene. Business people are savvy. They're focused on one goal. I think I'm very impressed with the whole Arab world, how fast we adopted to tech, how fast to adopt with the things we're doing now, how fast we used online to continue with our business. I think we should be more worried about the social scene, where we have to go visit those odd relatives and we have to still get closer to each other. And only time will tell how harsh governments need to be. I see what's happening in India now, and it's not pleasant. And I hope Egypt doesn't go through the India and Pakistan model of the numbers just skyrocketing because people just won't stay away from each other, and the whole system is not designed for that. But I think it's one of those things socially that will have to be done by hard power, I think.
Thank you, Doctor. The next question is from our beloved Salma Shahil from Abu Dhabi, in Abu Dhabi. So what kind of qualities of leadership is required for a more resilient nation? Now we hear of agile government. What does that really mean, and what leadership is required for such government?
So hi, Salma. It's an old friend, Salma, so it's always good to hear from her. So So look, agility is being able to maneuver very fast. Being able to maneuver very fast means you have built systems that are able to take decisions very quickly, which means data. Quick decision making requires tons and tons of data. You cannot make quick decisions based on gut feel. So think military. Military, they say in the military, the best plan in the world fails the minute it touches reality. So you have the best plan in the world. Think boxing. Michael Tyson has a great saying. I always remember saying, he said, your plans immediately change the minute you're punched in the face. Right? You have a plan and you think, I'm going to do this, I'm going to win. You take a punch in the face and then agility kicks in. So what does agility mean? First of all, you have a very good data system and decision making based on evidence. Second, you have very flexible budgeting systems that are able to say, you know what, stop working on these things, put all the resources here. We know government is anything but flexible when it comes to budget and spending. So you need to restructure how you manage budgets and how you think about them. And the last thing in government is about flexible workforce. We are talking now about the future. Look at the Canadian talent cloud. Canadian talent cloud says from now on, people will have generic skills and they will be used wherever they are needed in government. There's no more fixed line jobs in a certain vertical. So you need to reskill your workforce. And we are going to see, if anybody wants to invest, we're going to see a surge in reskilling the workforce in terms of new tools. But the biggest challenge, I think, is in government, is this whole idea of the ability to cancel things. Governments don't like to cancel things and admit they went wrong. And this is where I think government leadership has to have a lot of courage. You know, it's in the private sector, they have badges. Say, I failed. Brilliant. He failed. He got up again. In government, if you say I failed, that means you're out of the job. We need you to leave. You can't fail in government. Prime Minister in Jordan, Razak, cannot fail. But we should encourage him to fail. We need him to move fast, think off his feet, use resources here. If it doesn't work, move the other way. That's the agility we need. But we see it in places like New Zealand. We see it in places like the UAE to some extent, at least in Dubai, where I'm working now. So we see signs of these agility. But if you want to see a full-fledged agile government system, look at Australia. They have a very nicely written document. And the minister there said, finally, we get to apply it now. We've been trying to apply it for 5 years. COVID is a force multiplier. Everything we wanted to do in the past, we can do it now.
Thank you, Doctor. A few more questions. The next question is from Isam Al-Ismaili in Oman. So looking at the sterile economy, do you see standards and policies will be defined to be equivalent to the star rating of hotels? For example, with certification and audits, just focusing on how sterile a building or an airline or a mall is?
Absolutely, Isam. I think this is going to be the next HSE kind of level. We actually already have a few hotels in the region who claim they have been accredited by Bureau Veritas, I think, or somebody, being sterile. I don't know what that means. I don't know what standard they're following, but for sure, at least in the next 2 years, okay? So don't take this as a 10-year prediction. In the next 2 years, for people to come back online, for the economy to come back online, people have to show this, that we're sterile, we're clean. The way you can show me so I can come back is best by third-party stamp. When you do this for 2 years in hotels, I'm going to be shocked if I go to a hotel that says I'm green, I love energy, and I'm sterile and clean, and then one day they say, we're not sterile anymore. So there's a bit of stickiness. Once they do it for 2 years to get out of this mess we're in, they can't go back. So absolutely, this is the next HSE level.
Thank you, Doctor. We're almost reaching the 8 p.m. mark. We have a few more questions. Would it be okay to take them, Doctor?
Shoot them all once, and I can probably try to attempt, because I know people want to drop off as well.
All right. So our question is from Ahmed Yahya from Egypt. If the world managed to find a vaccine or treatments for COVID-19 soon, would that affect your perspective of change?
So look, I always bet on human forgetfulness. Small events we forget. We forget nations, we forget people, we forget loved ones. So people do forget. But so some aspects will be forgotten. Like you and me might be able to shake hands next time I see you if there's a vaccine. That damage will go away. But the shock that some countries got when they were told, we will not send you masks, you will die because you cannot produce Panadol, I think that will not go away. Some countries, at least the sober ones, the ones that have some sense of true north, that will not go away. The fact that we built 16 museums in one country and don't have enough hospitals will not go away. The fact that we don't have enough trained medical workforce will not go away. So my predictions moving forward is some things are here to stay, some aspects of the law, even if they find a vaccine tomorrow, I think none of us is going to rush and go to a concert. Some aspects are here to stay. You will find it very hard with a vaccine to justify your next business class flight for $10,000 to go and have a meeting like this. Just really hard for your accountant to swallow. So some aspects, yes, some aspects, no.
The next question is from Ruba Taou from Lebanon. How can you best prepare yourself for such a challenging world? How can you train yourself for agility?
So Ruba, I think what we always say, you cannot predict the future, but you can be ready for it. And when we say be ready for it, the first thing I tell people, and I do this to myself, is first of all, forget the stuff you know. We have so many mental models that affect our behavior and our decisions, and they're so enshrined that sometimes we find it very difficult to unsee things or to forget. And I think Tom Peters in the past said the best learning technique is to learn to unlearn. So first of all, convince yourself, Ruba, and I convince myself now, that everything we know is probably worthless now. So let's start a bit of a learning journey together. First thing we all need to know and learn is this data world. What does this data world mean? What does data analytics mean? We're going into an age where we say the next oil is data. So data is the future oil. Very few of us are actually very well versed in what data means and what it can do. We're not talking about coding here, but I am taking a few courses on data science. I'm trying to understand how data is being used for decision making. Data now it shouldn't become the elite who understand these kind of things. So you prepare yourself with that. You prepare yourself as well, I think, with adjusting your expectations of life. You know, a good friend of ours says, you know, if you want to be happy, it all depends on your expectations, not your conditions. And we have built a model in our mind where we expect certain things to look the same way. We expect certain success by a certain time. And I think we're going into a world now, it's much more fluid. In Australia, they say a graduate today will have 17 career changes in their future, not job changes, career changes. We were growing up in a world where a career change was you do that maybe once in life. So there's a lot of these things that we took for granted. And agility is being able to say, I'm going to try this. So I'll give you the advice of, you know, fail fast and literally learn something new every day. And it's becoming harder because there's a lot of stuff out there to learn. But this is a good start. This is a good start here. And this whole idea of really be open to the 1%. Almost everything you know, there's a good chance it's wrong now. I know it sounds horrible. I keep saying, just as I found life's answers, they went and changed the questions. But this is one of those things like pre-World War II and post-World War II. Imagine if somebody existed throughout that period and kept the same techniques. They'd be annihilated.
The next question is from Nahal al-Banhawi from Egypt. How do you balance between empathy and the type of leadership that we should be versus an aggressive business vision to help recover financially in companies and countries? So the question
is... Empathy doesn't mean softness, right? Empathy, so empathy doesn't mean you're soft and you're a tree hugger and no, empathy means really understanding the people around you, really understanding what success is, and trying to balance out the win-win community kind of community win with a big W. And empathy also, I'll show you an example of empathy. When Jacinda Ardern took over as prime minister, she's a hard-nosed prime minister. She has done everything Boris Johnson did, but she sat there and said, I'm not going to spend all my money on economic growth. I'm not going to define my success by GDP, by making more money to people. I'm going to define it by how my people's well-being is. So she introduced something called the well-being budget. Now, if you read the well-being budget, it's a very hard-nosed, typical budget, like anybody should do. But it has a lot of elements that show that the only thing in life, I think Nahla is from Egypt, right?
Yes.
Sure. Yes, الفلوس مش كل حاجة, right? That's the empathy that we're talking about in the future, in the sense that we have to redefine how we define success. Because you said hard-nosed business competition. And if you define winning in business in the next 5 years by making the most amount of money, you're in for a rough ride. The next generation of workers don't accept that definition. There's a whole generation of people who look at climate change as an issue. There's a whole generation who look at your social responsibility. This is not about putting 1% to CSR. This is about genuinely thinking, I'm part of a community, and if I don't do well by doing good, we're not going to all succeed together. So I advise you here, and I also, these are just words of advice, so I'm just saying, in the past, we grew up in a world where whoever dies with the most toys wins, right? Maybe it's time to reconsider that model. Maybe it's not about collecting the maximum amount of toys only. Maybe it's about having empathy to the people around you, to the community, to the people who work with you. If you're staring now down the barrel of a gun and saying, I need to get rid of 30% of my workforce, there's a lot of questions of how you do that, how you can reduce the impact. Do you keep everybody and shave certain things? Who do you choose first? We had an incident recently in the UAE that wasn't pleasant, and a company is about to come with a big statement because of lack of empathy. It just was a data-driven decision, and it backfired, and unfortunately, people lost their livelihoods. So it's not about being more empathetic in a hard-nosed world. It's really looking at this hard-nosed world and saying, I'm not going to play anymore. I'm going to play the game differently. Not easy.
We're going to take 3 more questions. I would just remind you to fill in the survey to let us know how you thought this session went. You can find it on the chat. Another question from Nabil in the UAE. Wouldn't you say that similar to how the world was extremely reactive to COVID when it first spread and leaders assumed we wouldn't be able to interact commercially again by 2021, which was a good thing? Isn't the outlook for us getting back to normal also being overestimated as well? People underestimated how resilient we were as a global economy when the financial crisis hit and said that things won't be back to normal until 2030 or 2040, but we bounce back within 6 to 7 years and smarter and more efficient.
I think we bounced back to a new normal, not to back to normal. So if you chart the things we used to do and the kind of companies we had pre the financial crisis, we didn't go back exactly to some of that. If you look at property prices in the GCC, very few of them bounced back to the whatever indicator you take, we bounced back to a new normal. We underestimate our ability to adapt. So you're absolutely right. There will be a new normal and we will adapt to it faster than we think. So by 2020, we will have a new normal and we will be much less anxious living it. But I don't think we're going to go back to how we lived in December 2019 anytime soon. And keep in mind this thing, COVID-19 is worse than a world war. The world war affected a certain number of people who went to war or lived at war countries. COVID-19 impacted every single person on earth. This is the first time where we have a mental, economic, and health crisis that's impacting 7.7 billion people. So I don't think we'll go back to normal, but you're absolutely right. We're unbelievably agile and responsive, and whatever the new normal will feel like normal. So we feel like normal now, but we're not back in 2007, by the way. Trust me, I wish we were.
The next question is from our board member, Mesa Bataina from Jordan. During the lockdown and as cities stood still, wildfire thrived, air quality improved, light pollution dropped, COVID-19 records and reports will be the result of rather unique and costly experiment. How can we benefit from this unique opportunity?
So Mesa, we did a study on COVID-19 and the impact on environment, and I can share it with you if you drop me an email. Yes, the whole world, basically environment improved across the board. Emissions, nitrogen emissions, CO2 emissions, fantastic. So, and what we're thinking about now, we're expecting, we call revenge pollution. The minute we allow you to travel again, you're going to be on 16 planes a day just to get back to traveling holidays and so on. So people will revenge, not in a bad way, but so unfortunately, I don't think we've reached a new normal in terms of pollution. But here's what it told us. Here's what it taught us. It taught us the baseline. We actually now have a baseline to say if we reduce production, this is possible. We have areas in northern Italy and in China that have lost all the smog. So this is possible. We have a new normal, a new baseline. We also have a chance now to say emerging from this crisis. Germany now is saying that the next wave of industrial investments that it's going to have is going to be in green tech. In green tech, because they don't want people to go back. Now, some people are going out of business. They don't want the people coming back into business over the next year to be as bad as the old ones in terms of pollution. So there are beautiful lessons being learned here. And here's the biggest irony of this. COVID-19 is a climate change problem. The more temperature rise, more and more animals are interacting with humans. And I can send you the paper that I'm talking about, where because of climate change, these kind of diseases are going to even jump more on humans. So because of climate change, we're going to get more of these pandemics, not less. But there's a lot of lessons to be learned, but I don't think we're in a learning mode now. I don't see governments really thinking this is where we take lessons for climate change, but I hope it does stick. But those dolphins you saw in Italy pictures, because of the environmental being clear, I think they're going to be hit back by revenge pollution with more cruises going soon. Yusuf, you're on mute. So I take it.
I got unmuted for a second. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Well, if you can hear me, I can't hear you, but if you could hear me, this is, this is the final part of we can really end with this question from Hamid Timami from Oman. Doctor, this is probably going to be the toughest and most important question. How are you this great and fabulous session? Thank you. So it was really, really a great session, Doctor. I thank you very, very much for being here with us, sharing your insights and giving us your time. We look forward to having you and meeting you in person and having you speak in one of our master classes very shortly. Thank you very much. Thank you all. Thank you to everyone for attending today's session. Be safe, take care, and hope to see everyone soon.
Thank you. Look forward to hearing from you all. مع السلامة.